What if the man who forced you into marriage was the same man you'd secretly loved all your life? Stay with us to hear how a cold contract turned into the most unexpected love story. But before we begin, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories that touch the heart and stir the soul. They say every bride remembers her wedding day as the most beautiful day of her life. I wish I could say the same. The chapel wasn't what I had imagined as a little girl. It wasn't white lace or a garden full of roses. It was the top floor of Sterling Tower, 56 floors above the streets of New York City. A glass cathedral in the clouds, silent and cold. The scent of sandalwood filled the air, heavy and suffocating, curling around my throat like invisible hands. I stood there wearing a gown I hadn't chosen, standing next to a man I barely knew, Ethan Sterling. He stood like a statue, towering beside me in a black tailored suit, not sparing me even a glance. His jawline sharp enough to cut glass, his expression carved in stone. Everything about him screamed power, unreachable, unbending power. And I was the fragile offering laid at his feet. My fingers trembled as I clutched the small bouquet of lilies. His secretary's choice, not mine. I tried to steady my breathing, but the weight of the moment pressed down on my chest. This wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't love. This was payment. A daughter's sacrifice to cover her father's mistakes. I could still hear my father's voice from just hours before, his hand shaking as he held mine in our tiny apartment. Please, Elizabeth. I didn't mean for it to come to this, but we'll lose everything. Your mother's house, her memory. I have nothing left to give but you. You, as if I were nothing more than currency. I had whispered one question, though I already knew the answer. And what about what I want? He had broken down in tears. And like I always did, I had swallowed my dreams for the sake of the family that had already lost so much. The priest's voice pulled me back to the present, his words echoing through the glass walls as if mocking me. Do you, Elizabeth Monroe, take Ethan Sterling? The rest blurred. I stared at my reflection in the glass. I didn't recognize the woman standing there, her hair pinned too tightly, her lips painted in a shade too bold for someone trying so desperately to disappear. I looked down at my hands, at the delicate silver band on my finger. The same band my mother had once worn before illness took her from us. I remembered the night she gave it to me. We had been sitting in our tiny kitchen, the hum of the old fridge the only sound in the house. She had taken my hand in hers, pressing the cool silver into my palm. Promise me, she had whispered, her voice frail but steady, that you'll always hold on to who you are, no matter what life takes from you. I had promised. But standing there, I wasn't so sure I'd kept that promise. Not when I had just whispered the words, I do, to a man who hadn't even looked at me. Ethan's voice was barely more than a breath as he returned the vow. I do. It sounded more like a business transaction than a commitment. My throat burned, but I kept my head high as the priest declared us husband and wife. There were no cheers, no applause, just the faint hum of the city beyond the glass and the hollow ache growing in my chest. Ethan offered his arm, and I took it, because what else was there to do? I dared to glance up at him, searching for anything in his eyes. But they were unreadable, empty. Like I was nothing but another deal sealed, another victory claimed. As the elevator doors slid shut behind us, I expected him to take me to the Sterling estate. That's what wives did, didn't they? Go home. Play the part. Pretend. But when the elevator stopped at the 56th floor again, I frowned. This isn't my office, he cut me off, his voice low, without a hint of warmth. We have something to finish. Confusion knotted in my stomach as he led me through the towering glass doors. The air smelled sharper here, like Leather, coffee, and something else I couldn't quite place. Power, maybe. He didn't ask me to sit. He didn't even look back as he walked to the massive black desk that dominated the room. My feet felt heavy, but I followed, clutching the folds of my gown and shaking hands. I had never been inside his world. I didn't belong here. Then, as I stood frozen in the center of his empire, my fingers brushed against something tucked inside, the seam of my dress. I pulled it out, my heart stuttering. A letter. The paper was old, creased from being hidden for too long. My mother's handwriting stared back at me. "Forgive me, my darling girl. There are truths I couldn't bear to tell. I didn't have time to read more." Ethan turned then, leaning against the desk, his eyes finally locking onto mine for the first time that day. Something flickered there, something I couldn't name. And suddenly, the weight of the letter in, my hand felt heavier than the ring on my finger. What had my mother hidden from me, and why did I feel like Ethan already knew? I swallowed hard, clutching the letter to my chest as Ethan's voice sliced through the silence once more. "Close the door, Elizabeth. This marriage isn't over yet." I didn't move right away. This doctor behind me loomed like a gateway I was too afraid to cross. His voice hung in the air, low and unreadable. I clutched the letter tighter, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Elizabeth," Ethan said again, this time slower, quieter, but not softer. I turned, my heart in my throat, and pushed the glass door shut. The faint click echoed through the vast office like a verdict. I stood there for a moment, my hand trembling on the handle, before I forced myself to face him again. Ethan hadn't moved. He leaned against the desk like he had all the time in the world, his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze fixed on me with unnerving patience. The city lights behind him painted him in shadows, like a portrait of power, untouched by the chaos inside me. "Come here," he said simply. My legs didn't obey at first. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to take a step, then another, until the edge of the desk pressed against my thighs, the cool glass sending a shiver through the thin fabric of my gown. Ethan didn't speak. He didn't reach for me. He just waited. I glanced down at the letter in my hand, my knuckles white from how tightly I gripped it. "What is this?" I whispered. My voice barely carried in the cavernous room. He looked down at the paper, recognition flickering in his eyes for just a heartbeat, before his expression shuddered again. "Something you're not ready to read," he replied. I stiffened. "Don't tell me what I'm ready for." He leaned in slightly, his gaze dropping to my mouth before sliding back to my eyes. "Then tell me, Elizabeth, are you ready for this marriage? Ready for me?" The air between us thickened, pulling tighter with every breath. I hated the way my body betrayed me, how the heat bloomed in my chest, how my pulse quickened under his stare. I wanted to lie, to tell him I wasn't, afraid that I didn't care. But the words caught in my throat, tangled in the truth I wasn't brave enough to face. He straightened, pushing off the desk, towering over me. His hand reached up, slow and deliberate, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. I flinched before I could stop myself, and something dark flickered across his face, not anger. Something else. Almost like disappointment. "This isn't what I wanted," I whispered. "I never asked for this." His jaw clenched, his hand hovering for a moment before it dropped to his side. "You think I did?" The words struck harder than I expected. I stared at him, searching for something, anything, to hold on to. "Then why? Why force me into this?" Ethan took a step closer. The heat of him surrounded me, filling the space between us until I could barely breathe. "Because your father made a choice," he murmured. "And so did you." I felt the burn of tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. That wasn't a choice. That was a sacrifice. He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, his breath warm and unsteady. Then stop acting like you're powerless. My breath hitched. He was right. I had given in without a fight. I had stood at that altar and whispered, "I do," when every part of me had wanted to scream. But standing here, in this room, with his voice sinking into my skin like wildfire, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to pull away anymore. "Tell me to stop," Ethan whispered, his hand trailing down my arm, ghosting over my waist. "Tell me to let you go." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, my fingers released the letter, letting it fall to the floor like it meant nothing at all. Because in that moment, it didn't. I wasn't thinking about family secrets. I wasn't thinking about betrayal or duty or honor. I was thinking about the way his touch burned through the silk of my dress, about the way his voice made me forget who I was supposed to be. My silence was all the answer he needed. With a sharp breath, he turned me gently but firmly, guiding me back until the backs of my knees hit the desk. His hands slid to my waist, lifting me effortlessly onto the cold glass surface. I gasped softly as the chill seeped through the fabric, grounding me in the reality I was about to surrender to. Ethan stood between my knees, his hands braced on either side of me, caging me in without touching me. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice like smoke curling around my resolve. I did. And for the first time since we met, I saw him. Not the billionaire, not the enemy, not the man who held my future in the palm of his hand, but the man who was just as lost as I was. His forehead pressed gently against mine, his breath hitching like he was struggling to keep himself together. "I don't want to hurt you," he whispered, the words so raw they nearly undid me. I reached up, my fingers trembling as they brushed against his jaw, tracing the sharp lines I had once thought were carved from stone. "Then don't," I whispered back. And just like that, the wall between us cracked. He claimed me there, on that desk, not as a conqueror, but as a man who had been waiting for something he couldn't name. And I let him. Because for the first time since I'd stepped into this gilded cage, I wanted to. I woke alone. The city outside was still wrapped in early morning gray, but the warmth of his body was long gone. The glass walls of his office stood silent, the lights dimmed, as if the night before had never happened. I sat up slowly, pulling the thin shawl tighter around my shoulders. My wedding dress lay crumpled on the floor near the desk, like a shed skin. I pressed my palm flat against the glass surface beneath me, the cold biting at my skin. Reality settled in like a heavy fog. I was married, and yet somehow I had never felt more alone. The silence felt heavier than any vow we had exchanged. I slid off the desk, gathering my things with clumsy fingers. My mother's letter still lay where I had dropped it on the floor. I bent to pick it up, folding it carefully and pressing it to my heart. I didn't have the courage to read it yet. Not after what I had done. Not after how easily I had surrendered. When I stepped out into the hallway, the world outside felt too bright, too loud. I found myself wandering aimlessly through the unfamiliar penthouse floor. The place smelled of leather, coffee, and something colder. Something like absence. I paused by the small kitchenette, my breath catching in my throat. The hum of the coffee machine reminded me of home, of the tiny kitchen where my mother used to hum softly under her breath while waiting for the kettle to boil. "You don't need much to make a home, Lizzie," she'd once said as she stirred honey into my tea. "Just someone who waits for you in the morning." I blinked hard, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. There was no one waiting for me now. I wrapped my arms around myself and headed toward the guest bedroom Ethan had pointed to on our wedding night. I half expected to find him there, waiting, perhaps with some cold remark or another command. But the room was empty, the bed untouched. I sank down on the edge, my fingers brushing the pearl buttons on the hem of my borrowed gown. Every inch of me ached with the weight of what I had given him, what I had allowed. I thought I'd feel powerful afterward. I thought maybe for once I had taken control. But the cold emptiness of this morning told me otherwise. I didn't see him again until that evening. I heard his voice before I saw him, low and clipped, speaking to someone on the phone. I hovered in the hallway, out of sight, listening to the measured cadence of his words. No press, no announcements, no photos. She stays off the record, do you understand? My breath caught. He was protecting me. I should have felt comforted, but all I felt was more confusion. I stepped into view just as he ended the call. He turned, surprised to see me standing there in my bare feet, clutching the letter to my chest like it was my only shield. He frowned, his gaze flicking to the crumpled paper in my hand. You still haven't read it. No, I whispered, my throat tightening. I'm not ready. Ethan leaned back against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest, studying me. You think reading it will change anything? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm afraid it might. We stood there in silence, the air between us thick with all the things we weren't saying. I finally found the courage to ask the one question that had been gnawing at me since sunrise. Why did you leave? He didn't answer right away. He pushed off the counter, walking slowly toward me until we stood just a breath apart. I didn't know if you wanted me to stay, he said quietly. Tears burned the back of my throat. You didn't even ask. Ethan reached for me, but stopped short, his hand curling into a fist at his side. I didn't want to take more than you were willing to give. My heart stuttered. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost. But then he looked away, his jaw tightening, and I saw the wall between us go back up. I have a charity gala tomorrow night, he said, his voice returning to that cold, businesslike tone. You'll come with me, as my wife. The words felt like a slap. Why? I whispered, hurt flashing hot in my chest. So you can show me off like some trophy? Prove to the world you own me now? His eyes darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. But instead, he exhaled slowly, as if holding back something heavier than anger. No, he said quietly. Because they need to see you by my side. For your father's sake. I flinched at the mention of my father, the man who had sold me into this marriage with nothing more than a signature on a page. The man I had tried so desperately to save. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was just a breath against my skin. I won't ask again, Elizabeth. Be ready. He turned on his heel and disappeared down the hallway, leaving me standing there with nothing but my mother's letter and the echo of his command. I pressed the letter to my chest and sank to the floor, the weight of my choices crashing down on me all over again. I didn't know if I had the strength to face tomorrow, but somehow I knew I would, because I was already too far gone to turn back now. The gala was already in full swing by the time we arrived. Dozens of glittering figures drifted through the grand ballroom of the Sterling Foundation's annual charity event. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the ceiling, casting fractured light across velvet gowns and tailored suits. Waiters moved silently among the guests, silver trays balancing flutes of champagne and tiny, perfect horse, d'oeuvres, and I felt like I had stepped into another world. Ethan had sent a dress to my room earlier that afternoon. Emerald green, soft silk, fitting my body with unsettling precision. I had no doubt it had been chosen by someone on his staff. Nothing about it felt like me. I was still fastening the tiny pearl buttons on the back when he appeared at my door, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo. He hadn't said a word when he saw me. He didn't need to. His eyes had raked over me, unreadable, before he held out his arm. And now, here I was, paraded on his arm like the perfect accessory. The murmurs started the moment we entered. Heads turned. Whispers floated like smoke in the air. I kept my chin lifted, the way my mother had taught me. But every step felt heavier than the last. Ethan's hand rested lightly on my back, guiding me through the crowd. His touch burned through the thin silk of my gown, steady and unyielding. I wanted to shake it off. I wanted to run. But I didn't, because I knew why I was here. For the family. For my father. For the debt that had stolen my life before I even knew it was gone. Ethan paused near a group of men in dark suits. Investors, I guessed, by the way. They nodded with thin smiles and watched me with the kind of interest that made my skin crawl. "Gentlemen," Ethan said smoothly, "allow me to introduce my wife." Wife. The word felt like ice against my skin. I forced a smile, dipping my head politely. The men exchanged glances, clearly amused by the way Ethan presented me like I was part of his portfolio. And then I saw her. Lydia. She stood just beyond the group, her red dress a sharp slash of color among the sea of black and silver. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, her smile as sharp as the diamonds at her throat. I didn't need anyone to tell me who she was. I could feel it in the way Ethan tensed beside me, in the way her eyes locked onto me like a predator sizing up prey. "Ethan," she purred, stepping closer. "I didn't expect to see you here. With company." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his grip on my back never faltered. "Lydia." She turned her gaze on me, her smile widening. "And this must be the famous bride," she drawled. "Tell me, dear, how does it feel to be the prize at the end of such a ruthless game?" The words hit like a slap, stealing the breath from my lungs. The men around us chuckled under their breath, enjoying the spectacle. Ethan's fingers dug into my back, warning me to stay quiet. But something inside me snapped. I stepped forward, out of his grip, lifting my chin until I stood toe-to-toe with the woman who had just tried to humiliate me in front of the entire room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "It feels like standing on my own 2 feet, I said softly. "Something you might not understand." The air around us crackled with tension. Lydia's smile faltered for just a heartbeat before it sharpened again, but the damage was done. The men shifted uncomfortably, clearing their throats, suddenly more interested in their champagne flutes than the confrontation. Ethan's hand caught my arm, firm but not unkind, pulling me back to his side. "Excuse us," he said coldly, guiding me away without another glance at Lydia. He didn't speak again until we were tucked into a quiet corner, the hum of the party a distant buzz behind us. His jaw worked as if he were holding back words too sharp to release. I braced myself for the inevitable lecture, the reprimand, the punishment. But instead, he leaned in, his voice low and rough. "You didn't have to do that." I swallowed hard. Yes, I did. His eyes searched mine, something flickering there, something raw and almost proud. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping ever so slightly. "You surprised me tonight," he admitted, almost to himself. I looked down, my throat tight. "Why?" "Because I didn't behave like the silent little wife you expected." He caught my chin gently, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. "Because you stood up for yourself," he murmured. "I wasn't sure you still could. I didn't know what to say." The warmth in his voice felt dangerous, like standing too close to a flame I knew could burn me. We stood there, the city's lights reflecting in the windows around us, and for the first time, I wondered if there was more to Ethan Sterling than the man who had bought my silence. Before I could find the courage to ask, his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening in an instant. I reached for his hand instinctively. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked at me. Really looked at me with something like regret flickering in his eyes. "We're leaving," he said quietly, guiding me toward the exit before I could press him further. But in that moment, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The ride home was silent. Ethan sat beside me in the back of the car, his jaw clenched, his gaze fixed on the darkened city beyond the window. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, fingers tracing the edge of my mother's letter tucked inside my clutch. I had carried it with me all night, like a stone weighing down my heart. I wanted to ask about Lydia, about the way his face had turned to stone when she appeared. But something told me now wasn't the time. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt longer than usual. When the doors finally opened, Ethan stepped out without waiting for me. I stood there for a moment, staring at the gap widening between us, before I followed. He poured himself a glass of something dark and expensive looking at the bar, his back turned to me. The tension in the room pressed down on my chest until I couldn't take it anymore. "Who is she?" I asked softly. His hand paused midair, the glass hovering just inches from his lips. Slowly, he set it down. "Someone who thought she could break me," he said, his voice rough, unfinished. I swallowed hard. "Did she?" He turned then, leaning back against the bar, his arms crossing over his chest. "She almost did." I wanted to ask more, but my courage faltered. I glanced down at my clutch, at the folded paper burning a hole in my hands. I had carried this weight long enough. "I need to know," I whispered, pulling the letter free and holding it up between us. "I need to know what she meant to you, and what this means to me." Ethan's eyes darkened, but he didn't stop me. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Elizabeth, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to hold your hand through what is coming. I wish I could spare you this, but there are truths you deserve to know. Years ago, before you were born, I worked for the Sterling family. I was a maid in their household, barely more than a girl myself. And one day, in a moment of weakness and loneliness, I fell in love with a man named Richard Sterling, Ethan's father. My breath caught. I glanced up at Ethan, but he didn't move. His jaw was tight, his eyes shuttered. I forced myself to keep reading. Our love was foolish, dangerous. When the family found out, they cast me out, shamed and broken. I thought I had lost everything. Until I found out I was carrying you. I never told him. I was too afraid. And when I heard he had married someone else, I vowed to raise you far away from that world. Elizabeth, I don't know what your future holds, but if you ever cross paths with the Sterlings, I pray you will remember this. You are not their property. You are not their pawn. You are my daughter. And you are stronger than any chain they try to put around your heart. Love always, Mama. My hand shook as I lowered the letter. My throat burned with 1,000 questions I couldn't form. Tell me it's not true, I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I've known for a long time, he admitted, his voice heavy with something I couldn't name. I found the letters my father wrote to your mother. The ones. She never answered. Tears blurred my vision. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want you to think this marriage was just another way to bind you to this family, he said quietly. I thought, if I kept it from you, maybe you'd have a chance to choose me for yourself. I sank onto the edge of my the couch, the letter crumpling in my lap. My mother had carried this secret her entire life, and now it was mine to bear. Ethan moved closer, but he didn't sit. He stood in front of me, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "You're not just a debt to me, Elizabeth," he said softly. "You never were." I looked up, my heart breaking all over again. "Then what am I?" He knelt down slowly, like the weight of the truth had finally brought him to his knees. "You're the only thing I've ever wanted that I didn't take by force." The words shattered something deep inside me. I reached out before I could stop myself, my fingers brushing the sharp line of his jaw. His eyes closed, his breath catching like the simple touch had undone him. For the first time, I saw the man behind the mask. Not the ruthless CEO, not the cold stranger, but the boy who had lost his father to ambition. The man who had spent his life building walls to keep everyone out, and somehow I had found my way in. He opened his eyes, searching mine. "I know I don't deserve it," he whispered, "but I want to try. With you." Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I didn't look away. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time, I wanted to find out. With him. We didn't talk much after that night, but something had shifted between us. I could feel it in the way Ethan moved around me, more hesitant, more careful, like he was afraid of pushing me too far. I didn't know how to trust him yet, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to try. It was early afternoon when the call came. I was in the small reading nook by the window, staring out at the gray sky, clutching the letter from my mother like a fragile lifeline. I heard Ethan answer his phone in the next room, his voice tight, clipped. "What do you mean they showed? Up at his house?" My heart stopped. I stood, my pulse pounding, moving toward the door just as he strode into the hallway, his face pale with something close to fury. "Ethan?" My voice trembled. "What's going on?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw flexed, his fists curling at his sides. "Your father," he finally said. "Someone went after him." I didn't wait for details. I grabbed my coat, my heart already racing ahead of me. "Take me to him," I whispered. When we arrived at the old house in Queens, I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the broken front door hanging off its hinges. "Dad!" I cried, running inside, my heels clattering on the worn floorboards. I found him slumped in his favorite armchair, his face bruised, his hands shaking. "Elizabeth?" he rasped, trying to stand, but I was already on my knees in front of him, clutching his hands, tears burning my eyes. "Who did this?" I whispered, my voice cracking. He flinched, glancing past me. I turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, his face like stone. "Tell her," Ethan demanded quietly. My father swallowed hard, shame flickering in his bloodshot eyes. "It was Lydia's men. She's trying to force me to sign over the last of the family property. The workshop." I felt the air leave my lungs. Ethan stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "She's not going to get away with this." My father shook his head, looking between us with something like despair. "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry. I thought I could protect you. I thought if I gave you to him, it would end." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words sinking deep into my chest. I had spent my life carrying the burden of his mistakes, of his desperation. And yet, here I was again, kneeling at his side, trying to pick up the pieces. Ethan crouched down beside me, his hand hovering just inches from my back, as if he didn't know if he was allowed to touch me. I turned to him, slowly, searching his face. "Why are you here?" I whispered. "Why do you care?" He exhaled shakily, his blue eyes dark with something raw and unguarded. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything," he said softly. And I won't let it happen to you." My father's breath hitched. "I don't have anything left to give." Ethan stood, towering over us both. But his voice had never sounded more human. "You don't have to give me anything," he said quietly. "You already have the only thing I've ever wanted." I felt my throat close. Ethan turned to me, his hand finally settling on my shoulder, steady and warm. "She's not yours to bargain with anymore," he whispered, his voice shaking ever so slightly. "She never was." I broke then, collapsing into my father's arms, clutching him like the little girl I used to be. He held me tight, sobbing into my hair, whispering apology after apology. Ethan knelt again, his hand brushing my back with a gentleness that undid me. I turned toward him, tears streaming down my face. "What do we do now?" He looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time I didn't see the walls. I didn't see the distance. I saw a man willing to burn down his empire to protect something he had never believed he deserved. He stood slowly, reaching down to help me to my feet. "We fight," he whispered, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, he meant it. The next few days passed in a blur of hushed phone calls, closed-door meetings, and whispers of legal threats that never made it to court. Ethan was everywhere, his presence like a wall between us and the storm Lydia had unleashed. And yet, he never once asked me to stay by his side. He gave me space, too much space, until one night, I couldn't bear it anymore. I found him in his study, standing by the window, staring out at the city like he was searching for something he couldn't find. I stood in the doorway, clutching the frame with trembling fingers. "You've been quiet," I whispered. He didn't turn right away. "There's nothing left to say." I stepped inside, closing the door softly behind me. "I don't believe that," I said, my voice shaking. "Not after everything we've been through." He let out a breath, sharp and heavy, and turned to face me. "You think this is over?" I swallowed hard. "I don't know. Is it?" His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. I thought if I took control, if I forced this marriage, I could finally take back what my father lost. I felt my throat tighten. "And did you?" He laughed bitterly, the sound low and raw. "I don't know anymore." I took a hesitant step closer. "Then what do you know?" He looked at me, really looked at me, like the mask he had worn for so long was cracking under the weight of everything. He couldn't say. "I know I don't want to be that man anymore," he whispered. "I'm tired of fighting ghosts." My breath caught. He moved toward me slowly, like he was afraid I might run. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I was stronger than him, colder than him. But all I ever did was become the thing I hated most. His voice broke, just a little, and my heart shattered with it. I reached for him, my hands shaking as I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. "You're not him, Ethan," I whispered. "You never were." His hands caught my waist, his grip desperate, like he needed something to hold on to. "I don't know how to let this go," he rasped. "I don't know how to stop." I pressed my forehead to his, closing my eyes as the truth poured out of me. "Then let me help you." He let out a shaky breath, his arms pulling me tighter against him, like he was afraid I'd slip through his fingers. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Not because you have to, but because you want to." Tears spilled down my cheeks, and, for the first time, they didn't burn. "I'm here," I breathed. "I've always been here." He pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, his thumb brushing away the tears on my cheek. "Elizabeth," he whispered, his voice breaking, on my name. "I'm yours," If you'll have me. I couldn't speak. I could only nod, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. He leaned in, pressing his lips to mine, not like before, not claiming or taking, but giving, offering. When he pulled away, his eyes searched mine with something I had never seen in him before. Peace. He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine, and led me toward the door. Where are we going? I asked, breathless. He smiled, a real smile, soft and unguarded, to somewhere that feels like home. The cabin was nothing like I had imagined. It was small, tucked away in the woods just outside the city, surrounded by tall pines and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. A porch light flickered warmly in the night, casting a golden glow across the worn wooden steps. Ethan squeezed my hand gently as we stood on the porch, his eyes scanning the familiar space like he was seeing it for the first time. This was my mother's favorite place, he whispered. We used to come here every summer before everything fell apart. I felt my heart ache for the boy he used to be, the boy who had lost more than I could ever understand. We stepped inside together, the scent of cedar and old books wrapping around us like a blanket. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, the only light in the room. I turned to him, my heart pounding. Why did you bring me here? He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the last of my tears. Because this is where I stop running. He leaned in, pressing his lips to my forehead, his voice breaking against my skin. And this time, I'm asking you to stay. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tighter than I ever had before. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered. And for the first time, I felt it, truly felt it. We had both finally found home. We stayed in the cabin for weeks. No phone calls, no board meetings, no contracts, just us. Every morning, I woke to the soft crackle of the fire and the smell of coffee filling the small kitchen. And every morning I found Ethan there, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, carefully pouring 2 cups. He had never seemed more out of place in my world, or more perfect. We spent the days walking the forest trails, the crisp autumn air filling our lungs, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. At night, we cooked simple meals, curled up under heavy blankets, and talked. Really talked. About our mothers, our fathers. About the scars we both carried, hidden so carefully beneath the lives we'd built. And somewhere in those quiet days and long nights, something inside me finally began to heal. One evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the trees, I stood in the kitchen, stirring honey into a cup of tea. The smell of chamomile reminded me of my mother, of quiet nights sitting at the small table in our old apartment. I turned to find Ethan watching me from the doorway, his expression soft, almost reverent. You look like her, he whispered. I felt my throat tighten. You knew? He nodded slowly. I remembered the little girl who used to sit on the counter while her mother made tea. The girl who smiled at me like I wasn't just the Sterling. Boy. My breath caught. I knew it was you the moment I saw you again, he said quietly. But I was too much of a coward to tell you. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I set the tea down and crossed the room to him, wrapping my arms around his waist, pressing my cheek to his chest. He held me there for a long moment, his hands trembling slightly as they stroked my back. I thought I could control this. He whispered, "Control you." But all I did was lose myself to you. I pulled back, cupping his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. You didn't lose yourself, I whispered. You found your way home. He leaned in, resting his forehead against mine, his breath warm and steady. "I love you, Elizabeth." The words cracked something open inside me, filling every broken part with something fierce and whole. "I love you too," I breathed. We returned to the city weeks later, not as strangers bound by a contract, but as something new, something real. Ethan resigned as CEO the next day, handing the reins of Sterling Enterprises to his trusted second-in-command. The media spun their usual stories, speculating on everything from scandal to betrayal, but we didn't care. We had other plans. We opened a small woodworking shop in Brooklyn, restoring old furniture, giving forgotten things new life. My father helped us run it, his hands steadier than they had been in years. My mother's ring still rested on my finger, a silent reminder of the promise I had finally learned how to keep. And every night, we returned to our small apartment above, the shop, the one Ethan had insisted on renting in my name. "This is yours," he had said, cupping my face with those steady hands. All of it. One evening I found him standing on the balcony, staring out at the city lights, just like he used to. But this time, there was no distance in his eyes, only peace. I slipped my arms around his waist from behind, resting my cheek against his back. He turned slowly, pulling me into his arms, his smile soft and warm. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you after we were married?" he asked. I nodded, my heart fluttering. "Close the door. This marriage isn't over yet." He chuckled softly, pressing his lips to my temple. I was wrong. I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "About what?" He cupped my face, his thumbs brushing my cheeks, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's just beginning." He leaned in, kissing me with a tenderness that stole my breath. A promise sealed not by contracts or bargains, but by choice, by love. We stood there in the golden light of the city, tangled in each other's arms, the world falling away. And I knew, with every beat of my heart, that we had finally found what we had both been searching for. Ourselves, each other, home. His lips brushed my ear, his voice a vow that would echo for the rest of our days. "You've always been mine, but now I'm yours too, forever." If this story touched your heart and reminded you that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead us home, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing more heartfelt stories that inspire, heal, and bring us closer together. See you in the next one.